Welcome back to the Junkyard Pod. I'm your host, Tony Pesta, joined by my co-host, Jackson Flickinger, and today we have another brand new guest, Dan Gilinsky of King James Gospel. Welcome to the show, Dan. Super excited to have you on.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
Of course, we're going to start off with some major breaking news for the Cavs, just earth-shattering news here. Jackson, I'm going to flip this to you because Sam Merrill is a long-term Cavalier now. They have signed him to a multi-year deal. I'll just send it to you before I say anything. We'll get your initial thoughts here on the Sam Merrill news.
Well, thank you so much. As the official bandwagon driver of the Sam Merrill bandwagon, this is a huge day for us. That 10-day contract has turned into a multi-year non-guaranteed contract. So really, it's just a contract for this year and, a training camp invite for next year. But still, in all seriousness, I think it's a good move for the Cavs because it's like they really need shooting. And I feel like every podcast I say that like 500 times, but they still need shooting. Sam Merrill is a really good shooter. He has holes in his game, but he provides something that the Cavs need. He's not going to be somebody who's going to help out the Cavs this season, but he is somebody who could potentially fill in that Dylan Windler role that I don't think Dylan Windler is going to be around next year. So I think it's kind of, he's someone who can slot into that role and someone who maybe can push into the rotation next season if the summer goes well and if he's able to make the team out of training camp. So there's no downside to this move for the Cavs. And, we'll see if Sam Merrill will prove me right.
Yeah, I do think this is something that it's important to note that we probably won't play much this year at all. If he even plays a single minute, it seems like the Cavs are just not. This is more of a next season thing. If he, again, like it does good over the summer in training camp, this is definitely a low risk potential reward move for the Cavs. He's a guy who fills their needs. Personally, I'm just going to push for this. I don't think he's going to play minutes. I would like to see him get some sort of chance. I realize it's very difficult at this point in the season to integrate a guy who hasn't really established himself at all in the NBA and definitely hasn't established himself with this current team. It's something that takes time. But if we're going to toss Lamar Stevens back into the rotation and kind of give up on Wade at this point, like, why not see what you have in Sam Merrill if you can find any time for him in a blowout game and he manages to put together some good minutes. But I just feel like the Cavs aren't in a position to be punting on anyone right now when it comes to their bench. So I do love that they've decided to bring him onto the team officially, give him an off season to integrate himself and see what happens moving forward. Dan, how do you feel about Sam Merrill? Are you as excited as Jackson?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's a player with movement shooting potential, which is not, frankly, something the Cavs have had this year. Obviously, with Dylan, we know the jury's out. I mean, it's the trainer's table. That's about it. Just again, as Jackson touched on, it's hard to see him being a piece for the future at this point. I feel bad for the guy. I'd like to see him on the Corn Ferry Tour maybe at this point because I don't really see him having an NBA future. But
one thing I want to say about, like, everyone talks about Dylan Windler golfing. Golfing is so much harder to like stick than the NBA, and that's like something that, like, I feel like I've heard like multiple people bring that up, like, oh yeah, he can just like be a golfer. And it's like, yeah, if he could be a golfer, I'm sure that's the route he would have gone. So not to totally
oh no, you're completely right.
But
it's just
Dylan Windler can do anything he sets his mind to, guys. Just believe in him.
Yeah, I mean, that would be like so sick, but just
I'd be pulling for him. I don't know. I mean, I know you watch golf, Jackson, but at this point, I just think with him, like, basketball, just like, I don't know, get into sales at this rate. I don't know. But yeah, with Merrill, as you guys touched on, it's a kind of a no risk flyer. Has, again, movement shooting capabilities, or at least has shown the potential to. And again, it's not as if he was a contributor, but him being around a winning culture prior to this might be able to impact winning down the road if he gets rotational opportunities. Could be a player that plays off the two careers well. So we'll see.
Yeah, I agree with that. To touch on the Dylan Windler thing, just to say my piece, I do agree. I think I've even said as far back as the start of the season, when that initial injury happened, that the time for Dylan Windler to make it, at least with the Cavs, is probably running out. There's basically no runway left for him to make any name for himself here unless they give him another chance in the offseason and he remains healthy and has a huge year next year. But I won't go as far to say that he's out of the NBA, because I do think if you get Dylan Windler healthy, which is obviously the big challenge, and that's just the start of it for him, because he has other actual basketball skills that need to be developed that haven't. But in terms of playing in Cleveland, it's probably best for everyone that he finds a new home and manages to build some consistency there. So I'm still pulling for Dylan Windler, still want to see him succeed. Not really expecting it to happen in Cleveland. I think everyone just needs a change of scenery there. And I am excited to see Sam Merrill take the torch from Dylan Windler and become the new guy who we're all going to get overly excited for, who probably won't play much of a role at all, but we'll see.
You say that, and we know he is going to play 10 minutes tonight. We are recording on Tuesday. He's going to play 10 minutes tonight. He's going to light it up, and we're going to have to come back here and do an emergency pod to break down his 10 minutes.
That's the fun part, is overreacting to the positive stuff. If you want overreactions for the negative stuff, you can go on Cavs Twitter whenever they give up like a 10-point scoring run. If you want to see us get too excited about players who probably aren't going to, do much in the long term, check out the podcast when Sam Merrill goes off tonight. But
I can give you some negative, overreactions too if you want, but I don't.
We'll get into that
because
no, we'll have time for that, because now what we're going to talk about is focusing on the bench, and really something that's going to become a huge storyline as we move down the stretch of the season here is Jarrett Allen's injury. Now, at the moment, it's there's no real timetable, I don't think, for when he's going to come back. It seems a little uncertain. The playoffs start April 15th. I'm not a doctor, but I would say I hope that he'll be back by then. I don't necessarily get the idea that we're thinking he's going to miss any time in the playoffs, but it's still very uncertain right now. With that being said, Dan, how do you feel about Jarrett Allen's injury at this point in the season? Are you worried that the Cavs are going to really kind of struggle without him, or like last season, or are they in a better position this year?
Well, I just think with their makeup, Donovan's kind of metal in those high leverage situations, it's helped of late. Like, I don't know, that first Miami game, even when Jarrett was in, I was still having feelings like, okay, this is time for Jimmy Butler to just will himself to the line over and over and over. And they almost blew that one. And again, kind of off topic for a sec, but the Cavs out of like ATO plays both offensively and defensively have routinely been an issue. I don't know what the hell JB is doing in that regard. It's terrible. But moving on from that, yeah, I think they're in a much better position right now. They have some winnable games ahead here. The Philly game is a concern, of course, especially with the way Embiid's playing. That should be, in my opinion, the MVP, but we're not going to touch that. But I think they're better equipped. I would have liked to have seen some Isaiah Mobley minutes at this point. I mean, with the Cavs, I think that could actually bode well for them, and he can actually stretch it a little bit, gives them a different dynamic offensively. But I'm not too concerned about it. I think he should be back. You would think within the next 4 to 5 games, I would imagine. But yeah, I'm not overly concerned. I think just with the Cavs in general, I think the key is the bench offensively, but defensively, I think they've been able to patch things together. They've been able to be viable, at least in key stretches, to give themselves a boost and create turnovers. So I think they're okay.
How do you feel, Jackson?
I do agree with everything that Dan says, really. Thank you for bringing up those ATO situations. Those have been driving me nuts all season. I just don't understand, like, it. I just don't like. I've watched that play from the Miami game that Jarrett Allen got fouled on. I've watched it so many times, and I just don't understand what the whole purpose was. They took Rubio out of the play. I believe he was like, you can't see him from the camera, like from the angle, but he seemed like he was like completely out of the play in the backcourt. Mitchell and Garland sprint to the backcourt. And then it's just like, okay, it's like a clear out for Jarrett Allen, who's not a good free throw shooter. It just doesn't make sense. And it's been something that they've been doing all season. So I just don't get it. And I don't know if I ever will, but it's inexcusable to keep happening at this point.
I guess their only saving grace would be if they play Doc Rivers in a playoff series. That would be the only way it would bode well.
Yeah, their inbounds plays. I wanted to do like a little montage, like compilation of all their inbounds plays that have just gone completely horrible, but I was struggling to find them. Really, it's not easy to find those plays because especially like a 5-second violation, they just don't show up on the NBA's advanced box scores and stuff like that. So wasn't able to, but I do agree with Jackson. I'm not going to pretend like I'm an NBA level coach and I understand all the X's and O's, but sometimes like I watch what the Cavs do at the end of games and I don't understand the thought process behind some of their inbounds plays, especially when they do send someone way into the backcourt, basically taking them out of the play. And then there's like no other movement going on there. Everyone's just kind of standing still. And it's so easy for a defense to force us into a 5-second violation, force us into a turnover. And that's something that in the playoffs could really, really hurt if we blow a game off of something like that. So I am glad that you brought that up. Bringing it back to Allen real quick, his injury, I agree. I'm not overly concerned. The Robin Lopez minutes aren't great to me. It's not ideal, but if you're going to be relying on a backup big, you're going to be seeing diminishing returns there anyway. So I'm excited to see how Evan Mobley steps up in this position. How do you guys feel about Evan Mobley playing center?
One thing that I'll say real quick about Jarrett Allen that I think is worth highlighting, and this kind of ties in with Evan Mobley. Last year, the biggest issue with the Cavs when Jarrett Allen went down is that Evan couldn't play defense. He couldn't like hang in there defensively. He was getting pushed around. This year, we haven't seen that. These last couple of games, I thought he's played really well, including the game against Boston when Jarrett Allen had to be benched down the stretch. So I think it's just a testament to how much Evan Mobley's progressed, that he's been able to really step into that role, and you don't feel like you're really missing Jarrett Allen like a ton on that end like you were last season. But one of the things that Jarrett Allen does provide is he's just this offense struggles to get going, and Jarrett Allen's somebody who can put pressure on the rim. He's really their only vertical threat that they have. He's their best screener on the team. He does a lot of little things to get the guards open. And that's something that's definitely an area that Evan still needs to improve in. He still needs to improve in, screening and finding ways to get other people involved more, I guess. So that's one of the things that I feel like we've really seen, especially in that, that Hornets game. It felt like there were times where the Cavs just couldn't do anything on offense, and they had to have Mitchell and Garland just carry them the whole way, especially in the first half. And that's where I think you miss Jarrett Allen most.
Yeah. And just to go back a little and touch on the Lopez minutes, I will say that I think the fact that Lopez is someone who can set screens makes him kind of useful in those situations. I still am not going to go as far to say that I like seeing him on the court, but it does help get the offense going a little bit when you have someone who can set a screen. Dan, how are you feeling about the Jarrett Allen injury with Mobley coming in and playing those minutes at center?
Yeah, just piggybacking off what Jackson said, his interior defense has seemingly been far improved this year. Just able to kind of deny entries a little bit better, just with that added strength and muscle. And I think a little bit, something that's kind of glossed over with him is I think his defensive rebounding positioning is vastly improved this year. That could lead to unnecessary fouls from him last year. And you kind of read into that with a grain of salt, given that they were kind of devoid of perimeter defenders. Again, Lowry was better than many thought, but he still would get beat routinely. So I think Evan has been able to improve in that area. And again, I think he's taken another notch up with his like rim protecting as well, and his ability to kind of play that cat and mouse game has just progressively improved as a dropper when he's at the 5. He's able to kind of manipulate guards into not necessarily feeling comfortable to throw that lob with his length, but also getting out there to contest threes, and kind of just, I guess, sort of being a pseudo switch big as well. I think he's just kind of taken another step in that way. And just what he's able to do with his active hands is just invaluable to their defensive schemes. And just, again, with Allen, as Jackson touched on, is a far more impactful screener. That I don't deny that. But I just think when Evan is at the 5, his kind of next level shot creation, especially if he's against guys like that, whether they're slower, he can get to the basket with quickness, or if there's a guy like Kai Jones on him, just as a higher IQ player. And I think just how he's able to finish through contact this year has really been apparent that's a key sign of growth.
Yeah, I think Jackson might have mentioned this before on the pod, but it is funny that for Mobley, when he's defending centers, at least in the past, it was more of a mismatch for him. It was more difficult for him to defend big men. But on the other end of the floor, it's ideal when you have centers defending Mobley, because that's when he has a mismatch. So it's kind of a weird give and take there. He has improved defensively in terms of being the anchor. I think that's what Jarrett Allen was last year, to a degree where, like, once we lost him, we really lost that anchor and that weight in the paint that we needed to really just make things difficult for the other team getting there. Mobley's a great rim protector, but he didn't have the strength that Allen does. He didn't have the rebounding that Allen does. And now this season, it was tough for me to find how much Evan Mobley weighs. It seems like that's just one of those things. You never know how much an NBA player weighs. You never know how tall they actually are. But I would assume Evan Mobley has gained some weight this season just by looking at him and the way he's playing. He looks much stronger than he used to. I almost wouldn't even say that he looks that skinny anymore. I think he's really filled out to a point where he kind of just seems like an average NBA power forward / center now. But with that being said, as you mentioned, his rebounding has improved, his defensive rebounding, and that's maybe the biggest thing in terms of, like, if he can play the center position, because without securing the possession, Mobley at center doesn't really, you're not gaining much there. And that's what Allen brought to the table, is that he could get the stop and secure the rebound for you. So I'm not too worried about Mobley at center. I'm actually very excited about it. If I can pull up some stats here from Chris Manning's recent story. With Mobley at center this season, the Cavs are plus 9.9 points per 100 possessions, and they hold a 106 defensive rating, which would be the best in the NBA. So clearly Mobley has taken some steps compared to where they were last year, where they kind of fell off a cliff with Mobley at center and Allen out.
Yeah, and just one thing quickly, I think one of the things that's most impressive is how easily he's been able to finish at the rim this year. He was a good rim finisher last year, but this year he's finishing 77.4% of his attempts at the rim, which puts him in the 83rd percentile, which is just crazy good. So, like, he's progressing so well. It's just, what we want to see next is him find more ways to get to the rim and attack, and that's where tightening up the handle would really help. That's also where putting on some more weight would help as well, because sometimes he gets pushed off his spot some. So, he's just really been fantastic, and he's an incredible defender, but I think we kind of sometimes miss that he's also an elite offensive player as well, or at least he has the skill set to become one.
I agree with that. So backing up a little bit here to, again, focus on Allen and specifically kind of what we were seeing from him before the injury. I think there's some slight concern building with some of his performances against the better teams. The 2 Boston games, he didn't look particularly engaged. I don't want to criticize his effort because it's hard to tell, but it just seemed like he was lumbering around, wasn't really making the usual impact. I went ahead and looked at some of his lowest rebounding games this season, and they have come against some of the better teams: Milwaukee, Golden State, the Clippers, Memphis, Boston twice. And so, to be clear, a bad rebounding game from Allen is like 7 or 8, but it's a little bit concerning that in these big games he's getting a little outmuscled and a little outplayed. Do you guys have any concerns for Allen when it comes to how he's going to perform in the playoffs? And I do, before I mention that, just to give him credit, in his last playoff series, which he was 21 years old, he did average 10, 15 rebounds and 2 blocks. So he is a decent playoff performer. It's not like he disappears in the big moments, but how do you guys feel about how Allen was playing prior to this injury, where I think some concerns were starting to bubble up?
Well, yeah, I think with Allen, offensively, there's going to be kind of limited touches in where he wants to get the ball. I think this year it's almost as if he's regressed a little bit in terms of the growth he showed last year, just in terms of like post up volume, stuff like that. And that had to have been the case with Mitch coming in, but I think he'll just be a double guy. I'm not going to say that I'm overly concerned, but it's just, if there's early fouls with him, are we going to be falling off a cliff defensively against playoff opponents that see us game in and game out? I think that's more of the concern, but when you look at teams like the Nets or the Knicks, I think he'd be fine playing the normal allotment of minutes, or really probably an uptick in minutes. But like, we do need him against teams like Milwaukee, obviously, against Philly. Again, he's struggled against Embiid, but who hasn't? So you just kind of need him out there as Jackson touched on, like as a screener, to make those multiple effort plays. And he really has closed out well defensively this year, in addition to that. So I would say yes and no. I know it's kind of a cop-out answer, but I just think what he's able to do inside and at least put pressure on the opposing defense on the glass and kind of draw some cheap fouls throughout games, I'm not too concerned. It's just what really is more of the concern to me is the bench going to do anything in a playoff setting?
Well, I will answer the bench question real quick. No, they won't. So we don't have to worry about that. But Jarrett Allen, yeah, my concern with Jarrett is kind of just when he's going up against those teams that like to go small and can space 5 out. I think we've seen him. He's someone who I think you're comfortable with if he gets switched onto a guard for a possession, but he's not somebody who you want on the perimeter all game. And I don't know who to blame for this. It's maybe a little unfair to blame Jarrett for sometimes leaving his guy when he's on the perimeter. Like, that's kind of what we saw most against the Celtics, is anytime somebody dribbled inside the 3-point line, he was just collapsing. So, and that's not really what you want when you're guarding a 3-point shooter. So I don't know if that's like on Jarrett or if that's on the coaching staff or really, who is to blame, but it is concerning that he, it kind of felt like he wasn't really providing you with the, with the advantages that having Jarrett Allen does provide this team. And really, you see that on the offensive end is where it felt like really concerning, is if he's going up against like in the Celtics game, the most recent Celtics game, I think is the best example. They had Grant Williams, Blake Griffin. That was like who they were playing a lot of minutes to, and he wasn't able to make that front court pay at all. He only finished with 4 points, like really just no impact at all. And it's like he needs to be able, in those games, he needs to be able to find a way to impact the offense in some way, especially if on the defensive end of the court he's getting a little played off the court. I wouldn't go as far as saying he was getting played off the court, but it's just kind of like when his spot on the defensive end is being called into question, he needs to at least answer it on the other end, and he just wasn't really able to do that. And yeah, I don't know if it's like this has become a theme against the Celtics and then the Warriors. So I don't know if this is something to be concerned about long term, but definitely in the short term, it's one of those things that we're going to have to keep an eye on. Like as we look at this core and what's best for them going forward, is Allen someone who is going to be able to be dependable in any playoff series, or will there be times where he's, not as useful as he could be?
Yeah, I think it is worth noting that Allen has had these kind of weird games against Boston and Golden State, these teams that are a little smarter and have been targeting him and, doing their best to make Allen the odd man out on the floor. I think when you look at the core four, I'm not worried about Allen, but I do think he is the one where, like, if he's not having his impact that he normally does, that's when you start to see the Cavs go to Lamar Stevens at the end of the Celtics game, or someone who's going to be able to play small ball minutes and not overcommit into the paint and not be the odd man out, which again, I'm not worried about Allen, but with the way the Cavs play, they really need him to be his typical 10 and 10 guy and have an impact on the defensive end, because if he's not doing that, their lineup really doesn't make much sense. I saw a lot of people complaining, why are you putting Lamar Stevens in the starting lineup when Allen's out? You have no shooting. And I'm just thinking, like, Allen doesn't provide shooting anyways. It's not like this is less shooting than they normally have. But yeah, I mean, I think Allen is just someone where if he's not going to have that impact, you're going to start seeing JB do some weird lineups and try to find other ways around it. And I'm not concerned, but the fact that his least impactful games have come against some of the most important teams, that's a tiny red flag for me, where I start to worry about Allen and his fit in the front court next to Mobley, especially if Mobley continues to take these strides forward as a center. I still think playing him at power forward is the best option long term, but it's just something to keep in mind moving forward. What did you guys think of the Lamar Stevens minutes, or if you had anything to say about what I just said?
One thing I want to say is that like the best version of the Cavs includes Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley on the floor together. So it's really about trying to find ways to keep them on the floor, because those matchups against the Bucks, what makes them such a tough team is that the Cavs have two guys who can defend the rim and defend it at a very high level. Not many other teams can say that. So that's what makes them special. The Cavs just need to do a better job of figuring out how to make sure that Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley can both do what they do best. Like Lamar Stevens was somebody who definitely deserved to play in that Boston game. He changed that whole game. But, the best version of the Cavs doesn't include Lamar Stevens, or doesn't include, it includes Jarrett Allen. So they just need to find ways, and he needs to find ways to be able to stay on the floor and be helpful.
Dare I say Jetty should get some minutes too, or is that?
I think Jackson would be on board with it. I would be on board with it too.
It would be nice to play some lineups with three shooters, but JB is not really a fan of that. So,
yeah, well, the biggest thing with Jetty is like, if Jetty was a good shooter, actually, instead of like a slightly below average shooter, it would really help. Like, he does so much off ball. He provides so much. He's been a pretty good rim finisher this year. It's just that he's still like, as good as the shot looks, he's just not that good of a shooter. But yes, I would be okay with seeing him get more minutes, especially in games like, the recent games against Miami, where they just can't get anything going in the half court. But I've just given up that fight, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely fair. I just think at times they can use a guy that will actually just shoot the ball if thrown to him on the wing and they're relatively open. I thought Dean was going to be that guy. I'm not even going to touch on that. Like, who knows what's going on behind closed doors there. But I just think with Jetty, it's somebody that can sort of rim pressure a little bit, and it is at least like he finds ways when he actually gets legit minutes to sort of draw fouls, and he's a transition target. I feel like he gets a million leak outs somehow. Maybe it's because he doesn't contest shots well, but his defense has actually been better, or at least somewhat competent this year as opposed to years past. So I guess I don't really see why he's completely in the doghouse is all. But just my
and like another thing is I do understand why Jetty falls out of the rotation sometimes. At least if I'm trying to put myself in JB's shoes, just because what he values, Jetty doesn't always seem to value those same things. But I feel like the lesson to be learned from that Boston game wasn't that Lamar Stevens is the answer. He should be getting all the minutes. I think the lesson should have been when you have a bunch of guys that aren't that good and don't really fit, it's okay to cycle some in and out just to see if you can find like a hot hand and then ride that out. And that's where I kind of get annoyed with like the 8-man rotation, where it's like, I get that it's tough to have a deep rotation when you play your main guys like 35 minutes, like not many teams have 4 guys playing, 35 minutes. So it is a little tougher, but it's like, I would like to see some flexibility there with like, maybe give Dean a couple minutes. If he doesn't have it, don't like take him out. Same with Lamar, same with Jetty, so I definitely agree with what you're saying there, Dan.
Exactly. As I touched on earlier, I don't think the Cavs are in a position where they can really just punt on any of the bench players and say like, all right, you're out of the rotation for the next few weeks or whatever. I understand why when Dean Wade plays as poorly as he has, that you're going to have to pull him out of the rotation and bench him. But at the same time, as Jackson said, I don't think the answer is, well, Lamar Stevens, you're back in the rotation for the future. Now it's like you have a lot of bench guys who are giving you a little bit of different things that you kind of need at various points in the game. And so it's like, if the offense is stagnating, put Jetty in, let him get a 10-minute run here, see how he does, or just like a 5-minute burst. Put Dean Wade in. If that's not working, let's get a Lamar Stevens night. Like, I don't think the Cavs, I know it's normal for a team to play an 8-man rotation at this point in the season, but the Cavs aren't really a normal team. And maybe you're going to have these weird nights where you're playing a lot of different bench guys and trying to see if anything sticks. Is that something that'll work in the playoffs? I don't know. I agree with Jackson. I think the bench is kind of just screwed, and this is what you have. And so there's really no right answer. But again, I think giving guys opportunities, especially when you have someone like Jetty who is very streaky, if you get him at the right time, that could win you a game. The opposite is true if you put him in on a night where it's not his night and you continue to play him like JB has stuck with guys at times throughout this year a little longer than maybe he should have, that could cost you a game. So I think mixing and matching, trying to do the most with the little bit that you have on the bench is going to be the key here to maximizing whatever it is that the second unit is going to give you, if anything at all.
One of the weird things about JB this year is I feel like guys have shown that they don't deserve to be in the rotation that are in the rotation, and they just stay there for like 2 weeks longer than they should. Like Kevin Love was really struggling. Everyone was like, why is he still getting minutes right now? Things aren't right. And he just stayed. And then they just kicked him to the curb. It's just kind of weird. And we feel like we're seeing that with like Dean Wade, where it was like Dean Wade first came back and he was really good, really helpful. And then he just stopped shooting. He stopped providing all the things that you were expecting to find from Dean Wade. And then he just stayed for like 2 weeks longer than he should have. And then he gets kicked out and feels like he can't get back in. So I would just like to see the process. Like, I get that you can't play 10 guys every night. You can play 8 guys. I just wish that they weren't always the same 8 guys, no matter what. And it just feels like Lamar could have, Lamar's in the rotation. It feels like he could have 3 or 4 bad games in a row, and he's just not going to leave the rotation until things just get too bad, and then he's kicked to the curb too. So it's just weird how I feel like it's just being managed.
Yeah, those are the 2 factors, the rotations and JB's after timeout plays, that I think those are the 2 things where like if someone criticizes JB, I'm with you. Other stuff, I'll defend him. Those 2 things, someone else needs to take over and figure out what the hell is going on there, because as an outsider, as a guy who just has a podcast talking about basketball, it seems like there's something very weird going on with the way JB handles those two things. But
I do want to say, like, real quick, is anytime like we criticize JB, I feel like it's also worth saying, like, JB is really, he is a really good coach. He's got all these guys to buy in consistently, and that's something that's very hard to do. I think like setting a culture is, I think, the most important thing a coach does, and he's done that so well here. They've bought in, they play hard every single night. This team really believes in each other, and I think that starts with the coach. So when I do criticize JB, I also want to say that, like, I'm not trying to run him out of town. I'm just saying, like, hey, this is kind of weird. This could be improved.
Yeah, I just think he's the first coach in some time, obviously, since Tehran, to actually get at the point where we can feel that there's, like, he's a viable guy, and you have, like, some faith in him game to game. And it's at the point, though, where they need to, like, there are some expectations, and the talent level is actually there for there to be expectations. So it's just, I guess everybody's just waiting to see, like, how in a playoff setting is JB going to be able to deal with it. And I guess just the greatest teacher is experience, and everybody's, like, kind of nitpicking with JB right now. Myself included, but yeah, just to piggyback off that, yeah, he's done a really good job. It's just, you have to, at this point, be able to fine tune throughout games, and then also from game to game from there. And it's just, like, every coach is going to have to go through it. There's going to be growing pains for coaches too. So just like there are for players, it's a really tough job. I'm not going to grow them that much either.
Yeah, and, like, one of the things that when you look at a team like the Bucks, and it's, like, kind of like a luxury that the Cavs, we can kind of talk about the Cavs in these terms, especially, like, where we were at, like, 2 years ago, where we were like, will the Cavs ever be, like, a 6th seed? So it really just shows the growth. But, like, the Bucks, all their rotation guys, like, they don't get played out the floor on defense, and they can shoot the ball. They're above average 3-point shooters. The Cavs, on the other end, have a bunch of guys who, you have some guys who are, like, shooters, maybe like a Jetty Osman or like a Danny Green, but those guys aren't guys you trust right now on the defensive end. And you have guys like Isaac Okoro, Lamar Stevens, who you trust on defense, but they're just going to get ignored on offense. So it's really, like, what the Cavs are dealing with is, like, JB does have his hands tied behind his back. And he is going to, at the end of the day, he's going to trust Mitchell and Garland to figure it out on offense, and just hopes that the defense can be enough to win. I would rather almost trust Allen and Mobley to figure it out on defense, and to just try to give the offense everything it needs. But that's just because I value offense more than defense, really. So it's just, like, that's where it's like, I think it's easy when, as Cavs fans, we've grown up just not caring about defense, because the Cavs, for a large portion of our lives, didn't care about defense and just cared about offense and spreading the floor. So I think that's where, like, I get my preference for offense from. But it doesn't mean that, like, JB doesn't have a valid point, because those guys are liabilities and stuff. So it's just tough.
Yeah, well, speaking of defense, it's time to get to the main point of today's show, because I have an agenda to push. Evan Mobley, in my opinion, I think the Defensive Player of the Year race is close. I'm not going to pretend like Evan Mobley is so far ahead of everyone else, but I do think he deserves more attention for Defensive Player of the Year, which, to his credit, perfectly today, the new Defensive Player of the Year ladder was released on NBA.com. He is in 3rd place now. Previously, he was an honorable mention. But I do want to run down some quick stats here that are, I pulled this up last week, so some of them might be a little different now, but Evan Mobley is number 1 in defensive win shares this season. He is number 1 in real defensive plus minus. He's 3rd in defensive rating. That can change depending on what filters you use to, depending on like how many minutes guys play, how many games they played. He's fourth in the D LeBron rating, which I won't pretend I know how that's calculated, but he's fourth in that. He's in the 99th percentile for rim points saved, and he's also first in three-pointers contested and second in isolation defense behind only OG Anunoby. So that's a lot of stuff I just threw at you. The point is, Evan Mobley is very, very good at defense, and he's very, very good at all aspects of defense, including protecting the rim and defending the perimeter. Jackson or Dan, whoever wants to tackle this, do you think Evan Mobley belongs higher in the Defensive Player of the Year race, or is third kind of where he belongs?
Go ahead, Jackson. I'll just follow it up.
Okay, well, I was going to let you have it because I feel like I'm just going to talk for 45 minutes, but I just pulled up the defensive ladder. I don't know if we should put too much stock in this, but like Brook Lopez, number one. Come on, guys. Like Brook Lopez he's not like, he's a good defender, but he may be the third best defender on his team. Like, I don't get that. And the Cavs have a better defense than Milwaukee this season anyways. So whatever. What makes Evan Mobley so special is he's like, wherever you like, whatever like situation you put him in, he is going to thrive. Like he can cover on the perimeter. He can cover fives. He can cover fours, and that versatility I think is what, like when you look at the modern big man, it's not like the Rudy Gobert types, the guys who can just shut down the paint. It's the guys like him and Jaren Jackson Jr. who can just do everything. They're everywhere on the floor. You're playing a team that goes 5 out and you need to, take Jarrett Allen off the floor. Fine. You still have Evan Mobley. You go against a team that is a really big physical team. Evan Mobley's good in that situation too. And that's just what, like, I think that's what makes great defensive players who they are. It's like the defensive metrics are always really tough to, they're really tough to sort through because, blocks aren't the end all be all. There's no like stat that you can point to and say, oh, everyone who's a good defensive player, has a bunch of steals or has a bunch of blocks or whatever. So it's, it can be a little tougher from that end. But one of the things that I just like to look at is like, when he's on the floor, there's no situation that you don't feel comfortable with Evan Mobley out there and you don't think that he can win his matchup. And that's what he provides that I don't think, like Brook Lopez doesn't provide. Like you can see a situation where Brook Lopez gets played off the floor. Evan Mobley's never getting played off the floor. Jaren Jackson Jr. is only going to get played off the floor when he fouls it a million times because that's what he does. So that's where it's like, I would rather have Evan Mobley than any other defender in the entire league. But, that's just me, I guess.
Yeah, those are all valid. I just to the Brook Lopez point, really valuable player. Like at the rim, obviously is key. Essential, whatever you want to call it. But he's on a team with Giannis, and they have Drew Holiday, who's maybe the best perimeter defender in the league. I think he is, I would say. I guess you could throw an OG, but I just think based on the number of years and what he's proven in the playoffs, I think that's up there. But moving past that, could also say Embiid is way more valuable than Brook too. Because he's taken strides in being more switchable the past 2 years. Obviously, injuries are going to be there with him, but yeah, I'm with you guys as well. I don't think I can put him there right now. I think it has to be JJJ. And personally, I would put Bam up there, just with all the kind of flux that the Heat has had this year. Jimmy being injured earlier on, I think that kind of threw them off, and they don't really have impact defenders aside from Jimmy. And Kyle Lowry's just been a train wreck since he's been there. So I would say he's in there as well with me. But yeah, just to all you guys, from the catch-all stats, but yeah, as you guys both have hit on, just can really fit in any defensive situation, any system. If you want to switch, he can play that. I think honestly, like being a viable drop big is actually like kind of is like a misnomer. I think a lot of fans don't realize, like, if you switch, there has to a lot of the time be other defenders that can scramble and take away the matchup off that. So you can't always do it. But yeah, I just think with him, he's an alien defensively and how advanced he is in every way. And as he fills out a little bit more, that'll really enhance what he's able to do at the rim as well. But I just think what continually jumps out with him is just the IQ and the intuition he has is just so rare. It's just like Hall of Fame level already in terms of basketball intelligence. And as the season's progressed, he's been able to get more of the counting stats to go along with the like lineup data meshed with that. So yeah, I'm with Jackson 100%. If at least for the Cavs situation, I don't think there is a defender I would rather have. And it just like his presence just makes everybody more viable. I mean, this is the first year really where Harris LeVert, we could say, has played like I would say above average defense. I mean, that's debatable, but with a guy with Evan Mobley on the floor, it also allows players like even Darius Garland to funnel to them and play to their help much more, which often doesn't get discussed enough.
Yeah, one of those things, like, when the Cavs were able to get Donovan Mitchell because Mitchell was exposed defensively, just, that a playoff series. And it was like a real question, like, could you have a good championship level defense with Donovan Mitchell on the floor? And that was, that's one of the reasons why the Cavs were able to go get him. And they paired him with Darius Garland. And there was real questions at the beginning of the year, like, can these two actually play together, two below average defenders? And, to their credit, they have played well on defense, but it's really just underscores how great like Mobley and Allen are and how great Mobley fits with whatever the team needs. Like you have, a big like Lowry out there, that's fine. He can still cover up for somebody who's a little slower footed. You put him out there with two small guards, he's able to make it work. You take Jarrett Allen off the floor, okay, I can be the only center out here. It's just he's been so good in so many different situations, and that just it's why the Donovan Mitchell pairing with Garland has worked so well, and it's just something that I feel like can't be said too many times.
But yeah, I think with the Garland and Mitchell pairing, those two have played better defensively than we probably would have expected at the start of the year. But it's still worth mentioning that while, yes, Mobley is sharing the front court with Jarrett Allen, and that definitely helps him defensively, you look at someone like Brook Lopez, he's playing with a former Defensive Player of the Year winner, Giannis. He's playing with arguably the best perimeter defender, Drew Holiday. And not to focus all this attention on kind of hating on Brook Lopez, because I do think he has been an incredible defender in the role that he plays, but he does kind of have the luxury of being the guy who can just be a 7-footer who sits in the paint. He can play drop coverage, and they don't really need him to switch onto the perimeter. They don't need him to play any higher because that's just kind of the way the Bucks play defense, and they're okay with giving up looks in the mid-range or floaters, or just having Lopez do what he does best, which is, again, stand in the paint and be 7 feet tall. To his credit, he's been very good at it. But when you look at Mobley, it doesn't matter what the Cavs ask him to do, he can do it. And I do think the Defensive Player of the Year, just like every award, is a narrative-based award to a degree. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's just kind of how the NBA has always been. And so someone like Mobley, it's no matter how good he is defensively, it's going to be very difficult for him to win it this early in his career. So when you have guys like Brook, Bam, as you mentioned, any of these other candidates who have been more established and are playing, you can make the case for any of those guys being more impactful than Mobley. I might disagree, but you can make the case. And so it just makes more sense that they're going to be in there. But with that being said, I did want to run down some of those guys who were on the Defensive Player of the Year ladder, which, again, as Jackson said, I wouldn't put too much stock into that. That's not the be-all, end-all of who's going to win the award. But as I said with Lopez, he's mostly a drop big. I do think if he's on a different team that can't really cover up for his weaknesses as much, he's nowhere near the Defensive Player of the Year award. But he's been great. Jaren Jackson, as Jackson again mentioned, the foul trouble is the thing for me would separate Mobley from him. I think Mobley hasn't really had the best stats this year in terms of fouling. He's fouled more this year compared to last year in terms of the amount of shots he's blocking versus how many fouls he's committing. But I still think he's one of the best in the league at contesting shots without fouling. I mean, he's been incredible at that. So that is what would separate him from Jaren Jackson for me.
One thing I do want to just, because I have the stats up, Mobley fouls on 3.3% of defensive possessions that he's involved in, which is in the 81st percentile, which is very good. Jaren Jackson fouls on 4.4, which is in the 42nd percentile. So they are worlds apart, really.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, Mobley, you hardly ever have to worry about him being in foul trouble because he's like stays on his feet. He never overreacts, and he's just always like in the right spot where you feel like Jarrett Jackson just isn't always in the right spot all the time. Like he's still like Jarrett Jackson's one of the best defenders in the entire league. It's just that when you're talking about the best, you're going to nitpick some things.
Yeah, Mobley is right in that conversation with the best rim protectors in the league in terms of not fouling. Jackson is kind of on the bottom end of that spectrum. So that's where, if we are nitpicking, as you said, that's where I would give Mobley the advantage. But if someone picks Jaren Jackson ahead of him, I'm not going to be super upset. Someone who we haven't mentioned, who I think prior to the Nets completely imploding their roster, is Claxton. I think he is maybe as close as you get to being as versatile as Mobley without fouling and being as smart of a defender, but his chances of winning probably go down with this team performance going down, just as MVP is, best player on the best team, with the Nets falling all the way to, I think, 15th in defensive rating. They weren't necessarily a great defensive team before either. I think Claxton's opportunity of winning that award has gone down the drain, but I still wanted to give him respect. And the one player that I want to mention who's consistently been brought up that blows my mind is Robert Williams. He's a great defender, but he's played 28 games this year, and he was ahead of Mobley in the previous Defensive Player of the Year ladder. So I think that's just crazy, especially as we mentioned with Brook Lopez. Robert Williams is playing with Marcus Smart, a Defensive Player of the Year, playing with Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. That one blows my mind. But to wrap up what I'm saying here, Mobley is, in my opinion, the best 7-foot perimeter defender in the league. He is great at defending the rim without fouling. He is constantly covering the perimeter, switching onto guard, switching onto wings, doing whatever the Cavs ask of him. And it's just hard for me to see anyone else being a better defender than him right now. Again, I think other players have very strong cases. If I had a vote, I would be voting for Evan Mobley. And I genuinely do not think that is because of bias. I just actually think Evan Mobley has been more impactful than the other defenders. But of course, as I mentioned, he's not as experienced. He's not as established. So I understand why he is lower in this race than maybe I feel he should be. And the last thing I'll say here, to kind of bring everything back full circle, with Jarrett Allen out for the next month or so, well, could be less, who knows. But with Jarrett Allen out, if there is an opportunity for Mobley to really assert himself and win the award, it would be right now if he plays phenomenal defense in Allen's absence and keeps the Cavs well above water here. Maybe he gets more recognition. How do you guys feel about that? Do you think there's any chance Mobley could win it, or is this just kind of a moral victory for us if he plays great defense in the next few weeks here?
Yeah, I'd probably say no, just because it's only his second year, and whether people want to admit it or not, I think a lot of it stems from, I think a lot of the national media, because again, it's narrative driven, don't really take the Cavs that seriously at this point. They kind of just say like, oh, the Cavaliers are a nice young up and coming team. They don't really take them seriously like they do the other top 3 of the 4 in the East. I think that has a lot to do with it. And then obviously like the JJJ stuff, for some good reasons and bad. Memphis is always in the public eye, and I just think he gets a lot of splashy plays. I mean, he's a kind of guy that will like deflect jump shots, which like half the time he'll foul, but it's that sort of thing. I think kind of matters more. I just think that Evan's probably a year away. I think whether it's publicly said or not, I think also Allen being on the same team, just for the totality of the season, I think diminishes it a little bit in maybe their eyes. But it doesn't diminish what he does bring on a nightly basis. And yeah, like you said, it could kind of allow him to make his own narrative more or have his own narrative be pushed more. We'll see. I don't really see that being the case, but there might be a little bit less flashy play from him having to play the 5 more is kind of that key anchor. But again, whether he is in the running really or not doesn't discount what he brings. And next year he really could be it like right there again. And this, I think also if he takes like an all-star leap offensively to kind of mesh with that, it might actually help him more. I know it sounds strange, but I would think it would get him more in the public eye as well.
Yeah, Dan's right. If he just was a better, like, if he was just scoring more and dunking more, he would probably be the upfront runner here.
Yeah, those are all very valid points. I do agree with everything you're saying. My fear is that everyone keeps saying, well, Mobley, he'll be in the race for years to come. And I just think of Anthony Davis, who has still not won a Defensive Player of the Year. And that was kind of the narrative with him, where early in his career it felt like maybe he deserved it. But everyone was like, well, he'll be in the race for the next 10 years, like he'll get it eventually. And here we are, and he still hasn't won it. So I hope that isn't the case for Mobley. I do agree with everything you said, and I think he probably will be in the race for the next few years, and maybe he'll be able to win the award as he improves offensively and, he keeps making strides as a player. But any concluding thoughts there?
Evan Mobley's a good player, and Anthony Davis isn't, so I don't know where that comparison's coming from.
Well, I just hope that Evan doesn't miss 40 games a year from sneezing and throwing his back.
Of course.
That'll play into it, but we'll see.
All right, some Anthony Davis shade at the end of the pod. Did not see that one coming.
I mean, if you're when he's locked in, there's nobody better. So I will say that it's just he doesn't play a lot, and a lot of times he's just not locked in. So it's just he's just a really frustrating player. Whereas you've never Evan Mobley's young, so we'll see as time goes on. But you just never see a situation where Evan Mobley is not super locked in and competitive. So whereas I don't think that we'd ever really see a situation where Evan Mobley's out there but not making the impact that he should, just because I feel like he's really competitive, and I feel like that gets lost a lot of times just because how quiet he is.
I agree with that. I do think he's very sneaky competitive. He has a little bit of an attitude to him that maybe isn't highlighted, as you said, because he's kind of an introverted person. But on the court, he's got a little bit of fuck you mentality to him, I think. But
Joakim Noah said that at All-Star Weekend, so that's what
did he really?
He'll take as gospel. Well, he doesn't have fuck you attitude, but he said he's got some dog in him, a lot more than I thought because he's quiet. It's okay, thanks, Joakim Noah. Go shoot your shots like a volleyball shot.
And on that note, I think Brook Lopez should be Defensive Player of the year.
All right, well, Dan, thanks for coming on, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
As always, go Cavs.
I agree. Go Cavs.
Let them know.